Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessen. This is Colorado State of Mind. With 11 days to go until the outcome of the 2012 election, early voting is well underway around Colorado this week. And as people across the nation get ready to cast their ballots, the campaign continues as the roar in the background, especially in Colorado, with what has been described as a shock and awe schedule of television advertising that's coming from the candidates, parties, PACs, and the secretive social welfare organizations. A handful of congressional races nationwide are on the especially watched list, and they are the epicenter of millions of dollars being spent to influence the results. One of them, right here at home, is District 6, including the areas of Aurora, Littleton, and Centennial. The shape and size of District 6 has shifted recently in the congressional reapportionment. Now, by voter registration, it is evenly divided among Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. It is Republican Congressman Mike Coffman who has represented District 6 in the past 3 years. He took over from Tom Tancredo after holding state offices for many years. Democrat Joe Miklosi was elected to the state legislature in 2008. He has a professional background in IT and nonprofit ventures. We're glad for the chance to talk with both of them tonight. I'll start with one distinguished part of the background on Representative Coffman is his service in Iraq and the Gulf War. He has been a member of the active and reserve forces of the Army and the Marines, and so it was natural then for him to make his way to the House Armed Services Committee and several of its subcommittees. Those are the lawmakers, among the top lawmakers, who must grapple with the fiscal cliff coming in January, with mandated cuts to defense spending and social spending. Congressman, your presidential candidate, Mr. Romney, says he not only wants to roll back those cuts, but increase defense spending. Will you help him do that?
You know, I think that there are areas where we need more capability in, but I've taken the position, on balance, I broke it with my party, where I believe that we can make cuts to the defense budget without compromising national security if we do it right.
What kinds of things?
Well, I think, first of all, the military is way too top-heavy. More admirals and ships than the United States Navy, and the other branches are equally top-heavy. I think there are overseas military bases that I don't believe we need anymore. And I think that, and I co-sponsored an amendment with Congressman Polis from the 2nd Congressional District to reduce our troop presence in Europe. 79,000 troops, and the Cold War has been over with since 1991. And then, as an Iraq War veteran, I mean, I'm proud of my service to this country, and so proud of the young men and women I met who served in that war and the extraordinary sacrifices that they made. But I'm very opposed to nation-building operations based on that experience. I believe that the notion of invading, occupying, pacifying, administering whole countries is at an extraordinary cost, both in lives lost, in those wounded, and in a cost to the taxpayers of the United States. I believe that we can achieve our security objectives using counterterrorism, a counterterrorism doctrine, whereby we align ourselves with factions within a given country to secure our objectives.
One more question before I bring Joe Miklosi in this. Do you think this would be hard, though, if there's a President Romney who wants to increase spending in other areas, doesn't go along with these cuts you're talking about? You know,
I would be advocating for these cuts even if these changes. I believe fundamentally that the Defense Department needs to be reformed. And I have exercised this leadership role and have the credibility to take on the Pentagon, and I have. I just think that, first of all, the legislature, I mean the Congress of the United States is a co-equal branch with the executive. And he will need Congress to acquiesce on these issues. And I will be there on the Armed Services Committee playing the same role that I played in this administration in terms of trying to attack the waste in the Pentagon.
Joe Miklosi, in your term as a Democratic representative in the legislature, you certainly have had some experience now with cutting the budget, even though defense isn't one of its pillars. So how do you approach the difference between a state budget and the federal budget?
Sure. Cynthia, we need a defense budget that builds allies, isolates enemies, and promotes our democratic values. We also need a defense budget that addresses the 21st century threats, such as terrorism and cyber warfare. Unfortunately, Mike Coffman and a lot of his Tea Party friends have placed a handcuff on our defense budget with sequestration and the fiscal cliff that will cut to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars our defense budget in a very haphazard way. As a result, our admirals and our generals have been taken out of the equation for those thoughtful and strategic decisions. I'll give you an example where that impacts us right here at home. I've talked to employees that work for defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and people that live in Highlands Ranch and Littleton, and they're concerned about getting a pink slip or losing their job because the stubbornness of the Tea Party has not been able to forge a compromise and a solution. Respectfully, there's a reason there's a 10% approval rating for the United States Congress, and that Fidel Castro actually ranks higher than the Congress in the latest Gallup poll. It's because of inability to get things done, and because of that, people in our district could lose their job, and we just need better leadership.
All right, well, that segues us into my next question, because Representative Coffman, you have been part of the Tea Party caucus. You have signed Grover Nordquist's Taxpayers Protection Pledge, which is to not increase any taxes. But you've also said that you see how this is going to have to be a compromise to get through this first of the year and beyond. So how are you going to square those things? Will Grover Nordquist allow you to do that?
Well, my pledge is not to Grover Norquist. My pledge is to the taxpayers of my district. You know, I am sympathetic in part to elements of the Tea Party simply because they concur that what I believe, which is the greatest threat to the United States, to our national security, is in fact our debt, and that we are truly on the wrong track relative to that. I see an opportunity for a compromise, and it is this, that a lot of, I think we're going to have a very impactful lame duck session, and a lot of the Bush tax cuts and other tax cuts as well are expiring. And it will take an affirmative act of Congress to move any of them forward. In other words, by doing nothing, that they all revert back to their prior rate. And so I think my goal is to get the best deal for the American people. Obviously, in a perfect world, I would like to see all of these tax cuts extended. That's just not the reality in the divided government of the lame duck session. And so I think Democrats have always said that if revenues are on the table, they'll look at entitlement spending. So I do see some opportunities here.
And Joe, you have said you will cut taxes for those who need it, but not corporations. Would you also increase some taxes somewhere?
Well, Cynthia, let's look at the record. Mike Coffman talks about compromises, but he has a record that's hard to run away from. During his 4 years in Congress, he's aligned himself with some pretty extreme individuals and groups like Grover Norquist and the Tea Party caucus. Mike Coffman called Social Security a Ponzi scheme, even though it's helped millions of Americans retire with dignity for over 70 years. And he voted for the two Paul Ryan Medicare destruction bills that would have turned Medicare into a private voucher program and told our seniors, you're alone, and make them pay over $6,400 more a year. But the worst part is he wants to take those savings and give them for tax cuts for millionaires and big oil. That's just not a responsible plan, in my opinion. Here in Colorado, I've cut my take-home pay 2%. As a member of the audit committee, I've helped find $71 million of wasteful spending and cut it from the Colorado budget over the last 4 years. And as a member of the state legislature here in Colorado, I've cut over $5 billion from the state budget over the last 4 years. That's the deepest cuts in the state's 136-year history. Unlike Mike in D.C., we have to balance a budget here. I support what I call the Mark Udall version of the balanced budget amendment, but we're going to honor our commitment to our seniors and our most vulnerable populations by protecting Social Security.
And Congressman, will you comment on Social Security and Medicare?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the reason why the Denver Post endorsed me over Joe Miklosi Well, actually, there are two reasons. First is a willingness to compromise when necessary to move things forward, and that's been reflective of my voting history. And then the second one is that the leadership on defense issues in terms of willingness to break with my party and cut the defense budget without compromising national security. Let me just say first, Joe Miklosi has said earlier that I voted to end Medicare. And no such vote has ever happened before the Congress of the United States.
Let's talk about a couple of distinctions where compromise hasn't worked in terms of how he's defining it, where real compromise is needed. There are 75 people that live in our neighborhood who work for Vestas, the manufacturing company that produces wind blades, right here in Brighton. They employ about 1,500 people. They're going to lose their job because Mike Coffman and the Tea Party caucus have not done theirs and not extended the wind tax credits, which we've done for 100 years for the oil and gas industry. I just want to make sure that those same tax cuts are provided to the wind industry as well. A classic example where he hasn't compromised.
Well, let me just say this, 'cause that's simply not true. I'm supportive of the wind production tax credit, and I'm doing everything I can to get it passed. So I'm, not sure where this comes from.
Well, it's not true because the business community in the wind industry says they want long-term cuts, not just 2 years. But here's a second example.
But that's what's on the table for the moment, isn't it?
Well, no, it's also a debate for whether we have it for 10 or 20 years, which is what I support.
Well, that's not the bill before us.
And Cynthia, on a second example where he hasn't compromised and where we need better leadership is in call centers and in shipping jobs overseas. One of my big platforms is Buy American legislation. I'm tired of shipping jobs to China with American taxpayer support. And one of the things I want to do is give Colorado and American companies a first crack at federal contracts so we can create good paying jobs right here at home. Classic example, in June of this year, Governor Hickenlooper came down to a call center employing 500 people in the private sector. He had a blue ribbon ceremony. On the same day we opened that up here in the district, he voted for a bill to continue tax incentives for call center related jobs to ship jobs to India and other countries overseas. That is not good for America.
Well, that was a substitute amendment on a wild and scenic rivers bill that had gone through the Natural Resources Committee that I'm on that would have taken out that bill and replaced for a voting on what he's talking about. Certainly I believe that we should discuss that issue, but not in replacing that bill. Let me just say I have been focused on trade and manufacturing issues and spent 2 years working with this administration to file a trade complaint against China on rare earth metals, and that's now gone forward to the World Trade Organization. I worked with Congressman Berman, a Democrat from California, in writing a reform to the export control laws, so our which firms that manufacture products that have dual-use technology, meaning defense-related, and so those laws need to be reformed, and I'm working on that, and that really benefits firms in Colorado and across this country as well. And certainly worked again with Congressman Perlmutter on a small business lending bill to make sure that small businesses have access to credit.
We're getting through a lot of things here. Let's turn to how this campaign is being waged. The women's vote, we know, is very important to both sides in every level of the election this year. And you have chosen, Joe Miklosi, in your ads to focus on something that really isn't before voters right now, the personhood amendment, and to accuse Congressman Coffman of being in favor of that. Why are you choosing to go that direction?
Mike Coffman will say he hasn't focused on social issues, but he has. And he has a record, and it's radical. Mike Coffman shares the same viewpoints of Mr. Murdoch, the U.S. Senate candidate in Indiana, and Congressman Todd Akin, the congressman of Missouri. And I'll give you a few examples. He voted to defund Planned Parenthood entirely, so women can't get mammograms. He co-sponsored, as an original co-sponsor, H.R. 3, the radical bill from Congressman Todd Akin of Missouri that would redefine rape as forcible. And twice he supported the Radical Personhood Amendment in 2008 and 2010 that would criminalize many forms of birth control and even outlaw abortion for victims of rape and incest. And here's why it's relevant. Because the Congress has to address issues about how healthcare insurance companies and employers provide healthcare. I'm going to stand with employees to make sure they have the freedoms to get the HIV/AIDS medications, mammograms, or birth control. And that's a huge difference between he and I.
Well, I've not been focused on social issues. I've been focused on jobs in the economy, small business and defense issues. And Joe Miklosi is focused on social issues because he has no credible plan to deal with issues like jobs and the economy. So it's the only thing he can run on. And I think that's really too bad. But let's look at Joe Miklosi's record, because I think it's stunning that in the state legislature they can only introduce 5 bills a session. And here where families are struggling, where the economy in Colorado is still down, what issue is Joe Miklosi's extinguisher issue in the last session? It's House Bill, I think, 1128, that deals with anti-discrimination for bikers, and I think that is to raise that to a level of a protected class, similar to race and ethnicity and sex. I mean, I think it's just stunning, and it really shows how just out of touch he is with the issues that matter to the people of Colorado.
Cynthia, let's talk about Mike Coffman's record during the Great Recession since the Great Depression in 2009, 10, 11. While Mike Coffman served on a small business committee, over 100 bills introduced by both Republicans and Democrats to address small business issues were introduced. He didn't original sponsor a single one. It wasn't until this year, when the district became competitive, that he decided for political reasons to co-sponsor a bill on small business issues. He has focused on radical social issues with Congressman Todd Akin, and it's time for him, respectfully, to go.
The jurisdiction of the Small Business Committee is only the SBA and government contracting. And so a lot of issues, I was a small business owner for 17 years, where I learned how to balance a budget, meet a payroll, and to create jobs. And so most of the issues relevant to small business don't go through that committee. And the issues, if it's health insurance for small business, all taxation issues go through the Ways and Means Committee. And so I have been focused on small business, but I have not been focused on the SBA, Small Business Administration, and I haven't been focused on government contracting, but I've certainly been focused on small business.
Let me complete the circle on my original question. You are pro-life. Will your sense of compromise extend to that in the Congress? What do you see coming up?
I'm pro-life, and it's just not my focus. It is not issues that I work on in the Congress, and and there aren't very many votes that involve that, but it's not an issue I'm focused on.
Well, let's talk a bit more about these ads that we mentioned at the beginning of the program. What is this like to be? I just would like to know what each of you thinks to wake up and see an ad on the television that you didn't create or didn't come from your campaign.
Well, Cynthia, that's one of the blessings, one of the many blessings of PBS, is that there's no political advertisements on public television.
Blessing, yeah.
And I think your viewers would agree, because it can allow for more thoughtful dialogue and debate like we've had here today. This race became national in focus back in the month of May, when Mike Coffman joined the birther movement and said he didn't know where our president was born, and that the President of the United States, our commander-in-chief, was not an American, nor an American in his heart. And I appreciate the fact that he wants to focus on those issues, but these are serious issues that need to be addressed, like the economy. And in my campaign, we've had a tremendous grassroots campaign, from knocking on tens of thousands of doors and making tens of thousands of phone calls. And they've been receptive to my message of buy American legislation, renewable energy job growth, and protecting women's health freedoms. And they truly think Mr. Coffman's stance on personhood and Medicare destruction and not trusting women are not the way to go.
Congressman, your ads have focused on something else. Jessica's Law is one of them. How do you make the decisions on, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, as a consumer of the ads, I think most of us have come to understand that they're spent and that there's more that you need to know about anything that is raised in an ad like this. Are you comfortable with what you are saying about Joe Miklosi?
My direction on the ads coming from my campaign has got to be truthful. And so where Joe is focused on speculation to say, Mike Coffman would do this and Mike Coffman would do that, and really a caricature of myself, what I said is, let's focus on what his let's focus on his votes. Let's focus on what he's done. And so anybody can go to Colorado.gov, and then and there's a link to the state legislature, and look at his voting record. And so he voted against a provision, a version of Jessica's laws for minimum mandatory sentences for these predators. And that's incredibly important. And then Katie's law, the requirement of legislation, and thank God it passed despite his opposition, that required law enforcement to hold DNA for all convicted felons. So if in fact they reoccur, that they can trace it back. Extraordinary science we have today. And so he voted against both of those provisions. And I think it just shows the kind of poor judgment. I mean, here's a guy who, who does a bill about, anti-discrimination in bikers. And so I think that it's just a pattern of poor judgment.
Cynthia, the only poor judgment displayed here is Mike's taste, or lack thereof, to run these despicable Jessica and Katie's Law ads, especially after what we have gone through. The ads were so despicable that the Colorado Fraternal Order of Police, which endorsed me over my opponent for my strong public safety track record and my strong lifetime sentencing support of child sexual predators, called them grossly inaccurate, despicable, and totally false. And that's why one of them went off the air. So again, on that issue, the negative ads for your listeners, who are you going to believe? His political handlers or Colorado cops, which endorse me? I think it's a clear answer.
I'm going to take this to one other...
I mean, can I say one thing?
All right.
They endorse you. It's a public sector union. They'd endorse you not because you're tough on crime.
Don't disrespect the men and women in blue,
They
Mike.
endorsed you. It's a union.
Don't disrespect the men and women in blue who protect our public safety, Mike.
I think we have rules about talking about...
Yeah, and you should respect the men and women in blue. I do.
All right.
Here's my point where I was interrupted, and that is he's tough on taxpayers. And it's about collective bargaining, it's about pensions, and it's about benefits.
Respect the men and women in blue. I do.
All right. Obviously, there's so many things we could be discussing here, but I want to bring up one more that I will ask for a short answer from each of you. Your district includes the site of the Aurora Theater shooting. Gun control is not currently on the radar with Congress. Do you expect it to be, or at the state level where you are in the legislature? What will you do if it comes before you?
I think as we right now we don't know all the facts in the case, but as we learn of the facts of the case, I think we have a responsibility in government, and I think this is consistent. I think with the right to keep and bear arms, that those who have violated our laws or who are mentally unstable shouldn't have firearms, and so what can we do from a standpoint of public policy to do whatever we can that is reasonable to make sure that doesn't happen.
Cynthia, I'll never forget attending the vigil in Aurora after the tragic shootings and hugging one of the young women whose boyfriend sacrificed himself so that she could live. And I've always taken the position that the Second Amendment is an important right. My mom owns a Glock. I grew up in a hunting family in a rural community. But do we really need hunter-run clips? Do we really need online ammunition sales? And yes, we need to reinstate the Clinton semi-automatic weapon ban, because law enforcement has told me some of those weapons are obtained legally to do very negative things. And additionally, why don't we invest in more of a counselor corps nationwide so that we can interact with people like Mr. Holmes' life earlier in their life before they go down a very negative and destructive path?
Thank you both for that. Let's have some closing statements, if we may. And Congressman, I'll turn to you first for your 1 minute on something we didn't talk about or something you want to follow up on.
Well, thank you very much for this this forum, Cynthia. I think it's great that people can learn about us not through 30-second ads, but through our own words. And so I would deeply appreciate your vote in this election. I think a lot of people think about me as having a military background. We're certainly true, 21 years of military service from the Cold War to the first Gulf War through the Iraq War, and I bring that experience to the Congress. To be able to, I think, have that critical view in standing up to the Pentagon and cutting the defense budget where, in my view, it doesn't compromise our national security. I have a small business background, again, where I learned how to manage how to balance a budget, how to meet a payroll, and how to create jobs. And I bring that experience to the Congress of the United States, and I think that being a former small business entrepreneur for 17 years in Colorado, where I could create jobs is so important. And I would, again, endorsed by the Denver Post and a number of other papers because, for two reasons. Number one, a willingness to compromise to get things done. And number two, I think my leadership on the Armed Services Committee. Thank you, and I really appreciate your vote in this election.
Thank you very much. And Joe Miklosi.
Thank you for having us here tonight. I almost became a minister when I was a young man, but I chose the path of public service because of my strong-held belief in serving you. I was raised in a middle-class family. My dad was a school teacher. My mom was a waitress. I was taught if you work hard and you play by the rules, your unique version of the American dream can come true. I still believe in that. I'm running for Congress because I want to reignite the American dream, restore job growth, and restore economic growth. Whereas I'm focused on pragmatic solutions like Buy American legislation and making Colorado the renewable energy job growth capital of the country, my opponent, Tea Party Mike Coffman, is focused on things like providing tax incentives to companies that ship jobs overseas. I'll protect women's health freedom. I trust you to make your health care decisions. My opponent supports the Radical Personhood Amendment. And finally, I'm going to work to make Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid solvent for decades to come, and do it in a bipartisan manner in the spirit of Ronald Reagan and the Democratic Congress from the 1980s. He called Social Security a Ponzi scheme, and he voted for the two Paul Ryan Medicare destruction bills. I'm running to be your member of Congress, but more importantly, your servant leader. I'd appreciate your vote on November 6th. Thank you, and God bless you.
And that is Colorado State of Mind for this week. You can see this program again at video.rmpbs.org. We thank Congressman Mike Coffman and State Representative Joe Miklosi for tonight's conversation. Good luck to both of you. In District 6, as with every district this year, there are third-party and independent candidates who are running against these two people. Libertarian Patrick Provost and Independent Kathy Polhemus talked with us earlier, and you can see their video interviews at rmpbs.org/panorama when you click on the Colorado State of Mind congressional page. Next Friday, it is time to count down to the outcome of Election 2012, and we will set the scene with a roundtable of Colorado journalists. Join us for that next weekend. I'm Cynthia Hessen. Good night.
You know, I think the amount of money, I think is just extraordinary, and I really think that, you know, I think I would prefer an environment where only individuals could give, and there weren't corporations or labor unions or political action committees, and that it had to be transparent, and it's just it's disappointing. I think that whole process is disappointing, and